And Scott, in your book, Naked Emperors, that's really an eyewitness account of where we had possibly an opportunity to change the dynamics, and we failed to do it, or maybe we just replaced it with a similar dynamic of, it's focused on power and corruption. And, how do you view this debt ceiling issue and the way it's playing out?
Well, first of all, the premise of the debt ceiling is completely wrong. The only two ways can one Congress control the future Congresses. One is when they pass treaties, and the other one is when they pass actual public laws that become part of the U.S. Code. The budget increase, whatever that turns out to be, and the budget resolution, whatever that turns out to be, cannot bind the Congress that's going to come into power in January of 2013. So when they talk about 10-year solutions, it sounds nice when they play to their crowds, but it's totally bogus.
Yeah, no question about it. Also, when they like to stretch things out just after an election.
Absolutely.
And all the deliverables are just after the election, that's probably one of the reasons they don't want to get into the details.
And what's so sad is that when you look at, both sides talk about cuts, at least 10 to 15% of our current budget is documented waste, fraud, and abuse. We have 75 statutorily created inspector generals, and we have about 500 people who work for the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. And literally on a daily basis, all of these teams of auditors and investigators are publishing public documents relating to how we are giving bonuses to contractors that don't even meet basic requirements on their contract, how we have duplication, how we have fraud, how we have waste. And so when you take a $1.2 trillion budget and let's say 10% of that is completely wasteful and has already been documented that way, why aren't we cutting that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know we like to focus, the rhetoric likes to focus on entitlements and so forth, but there are significant other areas of the government in which those cuts could be directed in a more rational manner. When you turned around the House of Representatives, and truly you are attributed for having brought the degree of integrity that we can associate with the House, but you brought some integrity back to the House during your time there as their chief administrative officer, and you saved $148 million on a $1 billion budget. What type of waste did you see, and what was your process? What was your approach?
Well, first of all, we actually saved $184 million, but we reinvested $36 million because Congress did not have any computers. I mean, they had some standalone computers here and there and one mainframe, but most offices in 1995, in the spring of 1995, still had Selectric typewriters. So we were literally wrenching them into the 21st century, and we reinvested some of the savings. And that's one other thing that you and I both have done in the corporate sector, is that it isn't always just simply cut the costs and it goes to a profit bottom line. Sometimes reinvestment is needed. But to get to the focus of what I did, many people in your audience will remember in the early 1990s, Congress was the single most corrupt body in America. You had the post office scandal, you had the check writing scandal, you had the restaurant scandal, the gift shop scandal where Rostenkowski went to prison. You had literally almost every week there would be a new bombshell going off on how we had a 40-year democratic institutionalized kleptocracy. They were robbing the place blind of tax dollars. And so one of the reasons the Republicans swept to victory in November 1994 was not just the swing against the Clinton health care bill. It was that most Americans said after 40 years and all these corrupt congressmen, it's time to try something different. And so that was our main mandate, was to go in and drain that swamp, get rid of, we called it smashing the cookie jars, getting rid of all the different items. I mean, one example that was still there when I walked in the door was that every member of Congress and most senior staff had government-issued American Express credit cards, and the government paid them. And then members and their senior staff were on the honor code to reimburse for personal expenses. Well, guess what? Those were never reimbursed. So the result was literally millions and millions of dollars went out the door for personal activities on your tax dollar. So we found 34 separate undocumented petty cash accounts. We literally went into offices and found drawers full of $100 bills. I mean, it was just, the place was awash with waste and corruption. And so what we did was an amazing team of corporate change experts came in 50 days. I mean, they keep talking now about these kinds of lengthy blue ribbon commissions to find savings. It only took 12 people 50 days to come up with 75 actions that netted $184 million savings, and those savings were implemented within the first 9 months after that report. So we're not talking about some massive new blue ribbon commission. People who understand that waste is waste, who have some basic understanding of business practices and accounting practices, can find the stuff. You stumble across it. It is everywhere. And that's really what we did. So we got rid of everything that made no sense. And that's something that government very rarely does. And then the stuff that we still needed, but had a clear private sector counterpart, we outsourced it. And again, did it quickly. And then what was left over, we made more efficient. When I walked in the door, we had 12 layers of bureaucracy between people who were serving member offices, and these are people who are running the telephones and moving furniture and paying the payrolls and things like that, and managing the health care benefits. 12 layers between them and my office. When we were done, which was the fall of '95, just 9 months later, it was down to 2 layers. And we could do that throughout the federal government.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I do have to say one thing tongue-in-cheek. You talked about honor system and Congress, and that's almost like an oxymoron.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't put those together. And, I look at, Richard, what you've put together in the Dreyfuss Initiative for our schools, and maybe we need to start a civics movement for Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
getting them to appreciate
it. As a matter of fact, there should be classes for new congressmen who should be taught what their responsibilities are, what their accountability is, how they are rewarded, and how they are to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that. Just because we've elected them to office doesn't mean they know what they're doing. And we should bolster their knowledge and their wisdom with as much public knowledge and discourse as possible. You don't any longer use the phrase public service with any idea of nobility. We believe 100% of us that all politicians, when they speak in public, are inauthentic. And that is an indictment of the flaws in our system that's heaven high.
I couldn't agree with you more.
It's not a question of liberal versus conservative or conservative versus liberal. It is, if you are a public politician, everyone in this country knows you take money you shouldn't take. You listen to lobbyists you shouldn't listen to, and you are in the pocket. And that goes for both parties, and they're in no way different from one to another.
It's definitely...
The thing that we have to realize is that we are, in fact, a political miracle in the history of this world. No one ever so revolutionized the idea of government as much as we did.
You're absolutely right, Richard.
We did it very simply by saying that the ruler, the king, the monarch, and the people could be one thing, and that there did not have to be caste or class differences. That was what was so revolutionary about our Revolutionary War. And if we had tried to pull it off in Europe, they would have killed us to the last man. We, however, established this revolutionary doctrine that the people were the final arbiters of political power. And the only way, as Lincoln says, that we're going to get beat is if we beat ourselves. Because we've got the best system, the fairest system on paper. But it requires, for the very first time in 15,000 years, that the common man participate in the decision-making of running the government.
I absolutely agree, and we're going to have to take a quick break. We're here with Scot Faulkner and Richard Dreyfuss, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Rick Amato on Intelligent Talk 1170 KCBQ.
This is T.J. O'Hara, the Common Sense Czar, and we are on this evening with Richard Dreyfuss, the founder and president of the Dreyfuss Initiative, and Scot Faulkner, who is the executive director of the Dreyfuss Initiative. And Scott, I know you have a little dinner that you have to attend tomorrow night. I believe you're a keynote speaker at the State Department dinner.
Right, of international scholars that I'm speaking to.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. So I know how tight your schedule is, and I want you to know how much we appreciate having the opportunity to have you on the show. And Richard, I don't know what you're doing tomorrow night, but you are welcome to join us. I would love to get into a constitutional discussion with you and kind of apply it to today's world and today's politics. I will tell you, Scott and I had a nice conversation last Thursday night for quite a while, and Scott paid you a compliment. He may not say this in front of you, but he said you were the best read person he had ever met. And based on the private conversations you and I had before and after the show, and even during some of the commercial breaks on Friday, I'd have to cast a vote along that line, too. So we'd love to have you back on tomorrow night if you've got time.
I would love to. I would love to make a point that a phrase we use every day, common sense, is not common. And it must become common again. We live in a common senselessness that doesn't make any sense at all. And I would be more than happy to come back tomorrow.
I would love to have you on. I think we could share some of what Scott and I have come to know and sincerely appreciate about your knowledge, your passion, and your genuine love for this country. And look forward to having you back tomorrow night. I'd like to thank both of you, Scot Faulkner and Richard Dreyfuss, for being on the show tonight. This is T.J. O'Hara, the Common Sense Czar, and I approve of this message. Good night, America.